Customer Bias: How Implicit Bias Has a Negative Impact on Customer Service by Cameron Green and Matthew Levy.
For our enabling objectives, we'll be identifying and defining customer bias as it extends to a broad range of platforms such as audience targeting, racial, gender, cultural, and occupational biases. We'll be understanding that this form of bias is a form of systemic prejudice used to control and oppress marginalized communities and people of color. Lastly, we'll be identifying ways organizations can confront and dismantle customer bias, establishing a working environment which promotes diversity, inclusion, and social justice. Customer bias can be seen as a form of audience targeting. What that means is companies or organizations, they would target a specific group of people based off of their ethnicity, their gender, sexuality, values, and beliefs in hopes of profiting from some type of sale. Or on the other hand, they would discriminate against those group of individuals based off of those characteristics. These organizations are often under fire for continuing marketplace biases and racial prejudices. Occupational bias is another form of this type of discrimination, where the individuals are usually blue collar workers and lower income individuals. It has been seen that organizations and companies would rather target or approach a white collar worker or people that are more on the elite status because they would assume, based off of those biases, that those individuals will be more financially kept than blue collar workers and those from the lower income status. Or if it is something more on a necessity, like a maintenance that is required, maybe at an apartment or a housing facility, the city may drag their feet to alleviate the problem or fix the issue based off of those members of that economic status. And traditionally, these are people of color. Gender bias has long been seen as prominent in the marketplace environments. Studies have shown historically that there is a strong inequality in customer treatment in advertisements between men and women. For example, some organizations and companies may go off of the social assumption of gender roles that is synonymous with specific products, such as you'll always see, or majority of the time, you'll see a woman in a cleaning commercial or a woman mopping the floor, not a man. And that goes back to the assumption that women are homeowners, women stay at home. They don't really have jobs such as men. And this idea affects the attitudes customers will have with organizations overall. Organizations may also be seen as having a mixed idea on the value and desirability of certain sexualities or sexualities in general. And this mostly reflects the individuals that are members of the LGBTQA community. We will see examples actually around this time of the year, within the months of May, June, and July, which are traditionally seen as Pride months. You'll start to see some companies and organizations start to slap rainbows on everything and pride this, pride that, and showing more advertisements that promote equity and same-sex couples and gender neutral scenarios. That does not necessarily mean that the profits of these sales go towards this community or that these companies in general are in fact allies. There's somebody of the community working on these advertisements, or they might just be homophobic and they're just looking to target this audience in the sake of gaining a profit. This reveals the issue with inclusion and publicity stunts that we may see in the marketplace. Some individuals may experience favor or discrimination by organizations due to a cultural ignorance, which can also be termed a cultural bias. And in this form of customer bias, organizations will decide their decision making process and what audience to target based off of a specific individual's political views, their ethnicity, their religious background, their creed, their values, and their beliefs. And the ways that they approach these individuals will reflect the overall customer service and the growth of that company. You may at times see an employer or a company decide not to approach a individual. They may not hire them. They may not want to target that audience based off of their background. Maybe they're wearing a turban. Maybe they're wearing a hijab. Maybe they're wearing something more urban, or they're a Republican, they're a Democrat. Maybe they're from a different country. Based off of that person's cultural background, this affects the overall process and the outcome.
In the continuing significance of race, anti-black discrimination in public spaces, Fegan writes about the difficulties African Americans face when shopping in predominantly white neighborhoods. They are often followed, blatantly ignored, or downright disrespected by merchants. Black teens often deal with similar circumstances with non-white shopkeepers. Unlike shops in predominantly white neighborhoods, however, once the customer gains a rapport with the owner or becomes a regular customer, they are usually treated with more respect. African Americans are actually 3.5 times more likely to have a negative experience with a white shopkeeper than with a merchant of their own race. The color of your skin often determines how the merchant perceives you, and it is evidently the case that African Americans, especially teenage men, are commonly profiled as thieves by white store owners. By displaying a transparent distrust towards your customers based on the color of their skin, shopkeepers dismantle any hope for a mutually beneficial and trustworthy relationship. Rather, this causes the consumer to feel disrespected and can often lead to unnecessary stress by the person of color due to inappropriate monitoring. If merchants succeed in establishing a rapport with their customers, as many non-white merchants do with their communities, they instill loyalty and establish a valuable bond between the seller and consumer. By failing to do so, it doesn't solely harm the person of color, but also is economically detrimental to the merchant because it discourages a large portion of customers to return. This is why it is so valuable for shopkeepers to be racially sensitive when they are interacting with a diverse array of individuals. While older consumers hold a large percentage of wealth in America and across the globe, marketing campaigns avoid targeting older consumers, and they are often caricatured in an unflattering light. New York Times shows that while 53 million people older than 50 are employed, only 13% of the images reviewed by the AARP were of older people working. On the other spectrum, young consumers too are commonly mistreated and discriminated against by shopkeepers. The age of an arriving customer can immediately dictate the response the seller has. Teenagers, especially African American boys, are disproportionately scrutinized by merchants in fear they may steal from the store. By stereotyping younger customers, they are put into a particularly uncomfortable environment by being blatantly mistrusted. Step 1 is to develop channels for consumer feedback. If employees wish to acknowledge their customer bias, they must first hear from the perspectives of their previous consumers. Ways in developing channels for consumer feedback include making forums through Facebook or other social media outlets, or establishing a team dedicated to designing frameworks for customers to reach out. Step 2 is being open to customer complaints by acknowledging their experience. It is one thing to allow customers to give feedback, it is harder to truly engage and learn from their encounter. Lastly, it is important to embrace being uncomfortable. In order to professionally and personally develop, one must delve into an uncomfortable topic in order to evaluate their flaws and shortcomings. Being aware of your biases isn't easy, but it is essential in order to self-reflect. And finally, Step 1 is to create racial, gender, and LGBT sensitivity training, to become mindful of one's privilege and gain insight into how this impacts your worldview by understanding the experience of others. Step 2 is to establish affinity groups. These are a diverse set of people with a common purpose. It can help employees identify where their perspective of the world comes from. Step 3, anticipatory service protocols. These are a standardized script or a set of norms for different circumstances, and make sure employees are aware that the rules apply equally to every individual regardless of race, gender, sexuality, or religion. And finally, but most importantly, to diversify the organization's workforce.